Welcome to the screencast on the laws of Mishloach Manot. One of the most enjoyable aspects of Purim is giving and receiving Mishloach Manot between friends and family. But where does this mitzvah come from, and why do we still practice it today? So if you look at the Megillah, we can find a source for the practice of Mishloach Manot after Mordechai and Esther heroically saved the Jewish people from sure defeat, and after Haman and his sons are hanged on the gallows. Mordechai and Esther issue a decree to the people of Shushan. They say, among other things, that the people of Shushan should deliver Mishloach Manot ish l're'ehu. Mishloach, from the shorish of shalach, to send. The people should send or distribute manot, portions of food, ish l're'ehu, from one person to his or her friend. If you look carefully at the way the wording of this decree is placed, we might find some clues as to some of the modern day laws and practices of this mitzvah. Let's start with the first half of the statement, Mishloach Manot. That, of course, is a plural word. Mana, portion, would be the singular. Manot, portions, is the plural. From the fact that it's worded in plural form, manot, we can learn the first of two important laws, and that is that when you give Mishloach Manot, it must include at least two food items. But when we talk about food items, we have to qualify that statement with a couple other ideas. First of all, food items mean edible food. That play food that you have in your pretend kitchens that your brothers and sisters like to play with, sorry, it doesn't count for Mishloach Manot, even though it might be a fun practical joke. We also have to qualify the concept of food to include two other things: different foods and ready-to-eat foods. Ready-to-eat means, as you can probably understand, something that requires no preparation whatsoever. It's ready to eat right away. We'll see why that's an important quality in just a moment. Different foods actually has led to some confusion over the years. Some people have mistakenly come to the conclusion that different foods means foods that have different brachot. That is simply not a true statement. Different foods means foods that have different tastes, different textures, different types of foods, but it doesn't mean that they have to have different brachot. In fact, if they have the same bracha, but they're different types of foods, that's perfectly acceptable. Why don't you stop for a moment and think about why these two particular conditions, ready-to-eat food and different foods, are part of the mitzvah's fulfillment. Why is it that in order to do Mishloach Manot the right way, you have to make sure that you have two different items and two items that are ready to eat? Go ahead and pause the screencast, take a few moments to think about your answer, then go ahead and resume the screencast to continue learning. Now that you've had a chance to think about that, let's practice some of the things that we've just learned. So if you were to have a Mishloach Manot that looked like this, an apple and a bag of pretzels, would this be okay? Would this count as Mishloach Manot? So let's think about the two conditions that we've just discussed. Are these two different items? Absolutely. Apples are apples and pretzels are pretzels. They're not even close to the same thing. Are they both ready to eat? Yes, they are. They're both ready to eat right away, and so this would be a great example of Mishloach Manot. Let's try another one. What if you have an apple and a grapefruit? Are these two different items? They are. Even though they're both fruits, and even though they both have the bracha of ha'etz, the apple and the grapefruit are considered to be different items because they have different textures and different tastes. What about ready to eat? Are these two items ready to go? Absolutely. And so this too would be a great example of Mishloach Manot. Let's try one more. The apple and raw chicken. So here, as you can clearly see, these are certainly two different items, but unfortunately, this isn't going to count as a proper Mishloach Manot because even though the apple is ready to eat, the chicken is not. So far, we've covered the first half of Mordechai and Esther's declaration, Mishloach Manot, and have learned about what it means to give foods that are acceptable. What about the second half of our statement of ish l're'ehu, from one person to another? So here, again, if you look at the words carefully, a lot of clues are provided in the language. Ish, a person, is singular, meaning one person has to give Mishloach Manot l're'ehu to another person, again in the singular form. And so this teaches us our second rule, that when you give Mishloach Manot, You must give Mishloach Manot to at least one other person. You could give to as many people as you like, but your Mishloach Manot must be given to at least one other person. So you're giving two different items that are ready to eat, edible foods, to at least one other person. Earlier, we talked about the idea of giving foods and packages of foods from one person to another, and why is it that we still maintain this practice nowadays? We can understand perhaps in the times of the Megillah, after the Jewish people's miraculous victory over Haman and his crew, that Mordechai and Esther would feel it appropriate to express their thanks by giving food baskets to their friends and neighbors. But what does this have to do with today's times? Why do we continue to give Mishloach Manot thousands of years after the Purim story has already happened? There's two reasons that people have identified in Jewish tradition. The first is that giving Mishloach Manot has a very practical purpose. It provides food for the Purim Suda, which is one of 4 mitzvot that we fulfill on the day of Purim itself. In order to have the assurance, the guarantee that people have food for their Suda, we developed the practice, continued the practice, I should say, of giving Mishloach Manot so that people would have a guarantee of having food at their Suda. Of course, today, we're very blessed to live in times where we don't have to wonder if we'll have special foods for our Suda. But there was a period of time when it wasn't necessarily so clear, and it wasn't a guarantee that people would have food for their Suda and to make the Suda special. So giving Mishloach Manot was a way to help people fulfill this practical mitzvah on Purim Day. There's a second reason, though, that's given in Jewish tradition, and that is that it builds friendship. Think about the last time you received something from somebody. How did you feel towards that person? Did you feel warmer relations towards that person? Did you feel closer friendship towards that person? Or did you feel less friendly towards that person? Well, I have to guess that you probably felt closer to that person, and that when that person gave you the gift, you probably felt a stronger attachment to that person than you did before. And that's exactly the purpose of Mishloach Manot. Giving these baskets of food builds friendship between people and creates the spirit of happiness and joy that is so important to experience on Purim itself. But let's pause for a moment and stop to think about what we've just learned. These here, 2 reasons that we've discussed, 2 reasons why Mishloach Manot are still applicable today, thousands of years after the Purim story. That number 1, it provides food for the Seudah, and number 2, builds friendship. What would happen in the following situation? Let's say you gave Mishloach Manot to somebody, and it was a great Mishloach Manot. It met all of the conditions that we've described. But let's say you didn't put your name on the letter that went with the Mishloach Manot or the card that came with the basket. In other words, let's say no one knew that the Mishloach Manot came from you. It was anonymous. Would that still count, based on what we've learned, as a proper Mishloach Manot? Pause the screencast and take a few moments to think about why or why not this would be a proper delivery of Mishloach Manot. Now that we've had a chance to think about that, let's go through just a couple more true-false questions to make sure that we have all of the information correct. Is this a true statement? You must give one item to one other person? No, it's not. You have to give 2 items to one other person. From the fact that it says Mishloach Manot in the plural form, we learn that you must give at least 2 items, not 1. How about this one? Mishloach Manot are intended to help people fulfill the mitzvah of Seudat Purim. That's a true statement. Like we said before, giving Mishloach Manot serves a very practical purpose so that people have food for their Seudah. There's one more thing I'd like to study with you right now, and that's the date on which Mishloach Manot need to be given. Purim, of course, is observed on the 14th of Adar. It begins at night, on the night of the 14th, and continues throughout the next day on the 14th day. Those people who live in Yerushalayim and other cities in Israel that were walled cities in the times of Yehoshua, we'll discuss more of this in class, those people celebrate Purim the following day on the 15th of Adar, what we call Shushan Purim. But giving Mishloach Manot, if you are to do the mitzvah properly, doesn't just depend on what you're giving. It also depends on when you're giving it. Mishloach Manot must be given during the day of the 14th. If they're given at night, it doesn't count towards the mitzvah. Giving them during the day is the way to fulfill the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. Now, you're welcome to give them to people at night. Just make sure that you're not counting on that to fulfill your mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. In order to fulfill the mitzvah, Mishloach Manot must be given during the day. Well, we've learned a lot today. Let's take a moment to review all the things that we've covered in this screencast on Mishloach Manot. In order for Mishloach Manot to be properly delivered, they must include two different, and by different we mean different types of foods, but not necessarily different brachot, two different and ready-to-eat foods. They must also provide nourishing foods for the Purim Seudah. This possibly could be a reason to give more substantial kinds of foods in your Mishloach Manot, not just the candies and small snacks that often find their way into Mishloach Manot, but more meaningful, more substantive foods, cakes, baked goods, bottles of wine. Those are some examples of things that people could actually use at their Seudah. Not to say that you can't fulfill Mishloach Manot by giving snack items. That's perfectly acceptable, but it might be a reason to give more substantial foods, considering that all of this food is really supposed to be intended for the Purim Seudah. We also learned today that Mishloach Manot are supposed to create feelings of friendship between people, and that they should be given on the 14th of Adar during the daytime. Looking forward to continuing the conversation and the learning with you about these laws. When we get back to class, we'll have a chance to broaden and deepen our understanding of Mishloach Manot, to go through some of these laws with some applications and some case studies, and to try to figure out when and when not this mitzvah applies in today's times. Thanks for watching today's screencast, and I'm looking forward to continuing the learning with you when we get back together in class.